Rights group Amnesty International released a new report on Monday which found sexual violence in the world's newest country was rampant and torture perpetrated by South Sudan's government and the opposition.
Well, the report revealed how government and opposition forces have committed horrific acts of sexual violence against thousands of people across the country since hostilities began in December 2013. And we have joining us the Regional Deputy Director, Amnesty International in Kenya, Michele Kagari, joining us now for more perspective on this. Thank you for joining us. Now, just as we said earlier, we understand that the government and opposition forces are the perpetrators of these horrific acts. Tell us what Amnesty has done to make it safe for the victims to come out and actually report the South Sudanese government officials.
It's not so much what Amnesty has done. And I think one of the important things about this report is that it highlights the bravery of survivors. An important part of our methodology, because the survivors are people who've experienced severe trauma, was to ensure that we did not apply any pressure. We only spoke to people who wanted to tell their story. And even then, we ensured that there were ethical approaches we used for interviewing to ensure we did not re-traumatize them, and there was psychosocial support. So these stories that are in the report that we published come from the survivors, and they want to see justice done. They want to see this violence stop.
All right, there's somewhat a panel, an investigative panel set up in the country that looked into matters like this. But the issue is the prosecutorial power of that panel. Is it are the punishment stiff enough? And what do you think the EU, the AU rather, should do to come in terms of mitigating this violence?
Well, the political process needs to be revitalized. There was a peace agreement that was signed that envisaged a transitional government of national unity with Riek Machar as the vice president. Obviously, the fighting resumed again in July last year. And while the transitional government exists, the peace process has been barely moving. And IGAD recently had an extraordinary summit where they called for a revitalized process. Now, until there is a process that is moving on and that is viable, a lot of the transitional justice and accountability mechanisms that were agreed in the peace process are just there stagnant. So one of the main things was to have a hybrid court. There was going to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. None of that has been put in place. There is a trial going on right now. It is one trial that is trying the soldiers that are suspected of raping a number of aid workers in Terrain Hotel in July last year. But that is barely a drop in the ocean. There hasn't been accountability for soldiers for sexual violence. And the practice is rampant. It's been documented not just by Amnesty International, but by other parties, including the UN.
All right. With the release of this report, of course, comes a call for action. How does Amnesty International intend to make South Sudanese governments accountable for their action?
Well, the governments have a duty to their people. And as I mentioned, there is still the conflict that is raging. The peace process is really not happening. And the IGAD is the political body that comprises states from the region. They have been leading the negotiations with the South Sudan government to bring out a stop to the conflict. Now, we need to see African leadership. It is not actually wrong to be expecting that NGOs or civil society would be the ones that would be in the lead. Where are the African leaders? Where area in ensuring that this conflict is going to stop? Where is the African leadership? And really our call to action, and I think South Sudanese call to action, is that really the leadership needs to come into place, the peace process needs to be put in place, the conflict needs to be brought to a stop, and the perpetrators need to be brought to
Michele, looking at the wider picture now, the UN peacekeeping forces might not be culpable in terms of sexual violence, but there have been cases of them being unresponsive to call for help, even from people who are being maltreated by the so-called rebels or sometimes the government forces. Do you think your dragnet should be widened to the international community in terms of call for action?
Absolutely. The UN mission in South Sudan during the violence that happened in July last year, and there was an inquiry that was carried out into that, could have done a lot more. There are other factors that come into place, including issues around the numbers of troops, the capacities that are available, the protection of civilian camps that exist were not originally designed to be as such. They are hosting thousands of people. There's a huge challenge as well with regards to humanitarian support. And that's one of the things that we highlight in this report, because even after they've experienced sexual violence, what's happened is that that's actually the start of the nightmare. The mental health impacts continue months and even years later. And in the POC camps, there is inadequate access to appropriate health care. We've got testimonies of women who are suffering from fistula. Others have contracted HIV. And then there's the other mental health impacts around depression, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, and there is inadequate psychosocial support.
Well,
obviously, in this context, there's a huge role for the international community to play.
We have to leave it here now. And Michele Kagari, Regional Deputy Director, Amnesty International in Kenya, thank you for your time on TVC News.